I think we need to evolve our view on the role and value of religion and spirituality in society. I hope we can move beyond sectarian religion and begin a conversation about what does universal spirituality look and feel like. And to do that, we can't afford to be myopic. We need to acknowledge the possibility that spiritual worldviews different to our own can add real value to our life, if only we could approach them with an open mind and an open heart. In 2003, my first child was born, and soon after, I started thinking about his education. What type of school would I want him to go to? I wanted a school that really valued spirituality. I couldn't find one, so I set about trying to set one up. At the time, the government only allowed individuals or community groups to establish schools that were religiously designated. And this was how the first UK state-funded Hindu school was born. Since then, we've established 7 faith schools, and the legal framework has changed to allow us to create non-faith schools. And it's these schools, which have spiritual insight at the core, but no religious affiliation, that have brought some really serious but also very welcome challenges. For example, how can we actually be spiritual but not religious? How can spirituality be inclusive without being completely watered down? How can we go beyond just respecting and tolerating others to deeply accepting them? These are not easy questions, but they are essential ones. With a history of brutal colonization and plagued by institutional hypocrisy, sectarianism, sexual exploitation, racism, and misogyny, religion is viewed by many as intolerably corrupt, or at best as a naive and old-fashioned way of living. Scientism is the new religion of our times. We have thrown the spiritual baby out with the religious bathwater. But science alone cannot answer all our questions. What is the meaning of life? Who am I? What is my greater purpose? How can I be happy? Why is there suffering? Can I enjoy material things and still be spiritual? I believe a universal approach to spiritual insight in schools can fill a gap in education. I also believe it can help address one of the biggest challenges of our times. How can we be deeply inclusive and still loyal to our own traditions? How can we move beyond sectarian religion and provide a framework for universal spirituality? Over the past 15 years or so, I've visited many schools looking for best practice and ideas around universal spirituality. Unfortunately, I haven't been blown away by what's on offer. One school that was particularly proud of their approach to mindfulness allowed me to observe a lesson. The teacher gathered the 7-year-olds on a rug and settled them down. He then asked them to choose a program from a selection on the screen. Several hands went up. The teacher picked a child who then went on to select the icon that said, holiday. The children were asked to close their eyes and sit straight. The teacher pressed play. And for the next 5 minutes, the children had to try and meditate on the sound of an airplane engine. My mind went instantly to my noise-cancelling headphones I use on planes precisely to mitigate the noise of an airplane engine. I wasn't able to ask the children what they took from that lesson, so I can only hope it was more than I did. But it left me increasingly convinced of the work we need to do to create meaningful experiences of spirituality in our school system. To be spiritual but not religious is both attractive and convenient. But left undefined, the notion is also ambiguous and impotent. Our challenge is to find a universal and philosophical spirituality that is not limited to any particular faith's tradition, but is based on our common spiritual identity. A spirituality that can be understood and experienced by everyone, everywhere, to transcend nationality, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and yes, even religion. So can we define spiritual without reference to God? Expanding our consciousness, understanding our relationship with the world, self-actualization, and other such variants have been offered as possible answers. There are several ways by which we can have a spirituality with substance whilst distinguishing it from religion. Since religion is a particular manifestation, practice, and belief, whereas spirituality is its essence. If I change my religion, that doesn't necessarily mean I become more or less spiritual. I think spirituality comes down to these 4 essential and universal principles. Number 1, identity. We all have multiple identities, our gender, our age, our nationality, our religion, and so on. But when we peel back all the layers, and after all the changeable things about us are removed, when we ask ourselves at a most fundamental level, who am I? What's the answer? Our most fundamental identity is at the level of consciousness. Spirituality is about increasingly identifying ourselves with who we are at this most fundamental level, beyond all the more superficial stuff. The second thing spirituality is about is elevating consciousness. We all experience fluctuating consciousness through our life. We experience these changes on a day-by-day, even moment-by-moment basis. We know when we are in better levels of consciousness and when we feel low. Spirituality is about finding practices that help us elevate and retain our higher levels of consciousness. Thirdly, spirituality is an antidote to materialism. Things and even people begin to lose intrinsic value if we see them as nothing other than material. There is obviously a place for material things, but as my mentor used to say, we are supposed to use things and value people, but instead we value things and use people. Finally, spirituality gives us greater purpose. Numerous studies have shown the benefit of having a purpose in life, something greater than ourselves. We have a human need to contribute. Our contribution makes us whole and benefits our self-worth, not in any arrogant way, but in a deeply humble way, where we find identity, purpose, and community. These four aspects have proven profound implications for our well-being and mental health, and they are available to those of all faith and to those of none. Young people today, perhaps more than any other time in history, are exposed to intense levels of social pressure around identity. The prominence of identity politics is an easy example. Materialism creates and pushes impulses onto increasingly young audiences. Many children, younger than school age, have daily exposure to digital advertising. And by the time they hit high school, too many have been exposed to everything from pornography to gambling to intoxicants. How exactly do we expect them to simply resist these temptations when the world keeps forcing it upon them on a daily and now hourly basis? The consequent guilt and insecurity are damaging. Pervasive and invasive social media means that young people are growing up dependent on constant external validation. How do they navigate all this without a coherent image of their own identity? How do they instead become reliant on their internal validation and from those who deeply love and care for them? Where have they had a fair chance of understanding their identity and actively choosing what they want to become? There are some things we are doing right, and there are some things we can do little about. But there are also some things we should just be fixing, and we can't make much progress without spiritual insight. The conflation of spirituality with religion is holding us back from doing so, and so we need a solution. I led colleagues in developing a framework for spiritual insight that has application for religious and non-religious schools. We have 6 foundational principles that we all strive to live by. 1, we realize our incredible potential by nurturing all parts of ourselves, intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual. 2, we choose to respond to life with goodness and thus nurture goodness within us. 3, we care for and respect all life, human, animal, and plant, and live in a way that causes the least possible harm. 4, we each observe the one same reality from our own unique perspective and engage in open-minded dialogue to deeply enrich our vision. 5, we serve a greater purpose by having a meaningful and satisfying life of contribution. And 6, we are nourished and nourish others through relationships that fulfill our need to love and be loved, encouraging us to be the best we can be. Through living these principles, we hold ourselves accountable for our own well-being and that of our whole community. Using these principles, we developed our philosophy of education, and then new curricula for philosophy, religion, and ethics, meditation, yoga, and personal development, all with an aim to promoting spiritual insight, while distinguishing between spiritual and religious. Our need is not for a watered-down, impotent approach to spirituality, not the airplane noise examples that come from bringing it down to the... We need an approach that is profound and potent, and one that is as broad and inclusive as it is deep. To do this, we must be willing to give up the notion that mine is the only way, or that me and my group have a monopoly on religious or spiritual insight. We must be willing to have a 21st century rational conversation about the genuine gifts religious traditions from around the world have to offer and their unnecessary baggage that we can leave at the door so that we can arrive at a place where we know what it means to be spiritual in today's world. I want to take this conversation forward because I think it's the most important one for us to have. I hope you will join me.